Action!
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Grudge Report. This is the series of the Grudge Report that talks about the Expanse. Today, we're going to talk about Season 4, Episode 3, Subduction. My name is Margaret Reeb, and I work at the SETI Institute. I am joined, as always, by Franck Marchis, who is
Hello.
a senior astronomer at the SETI Institute and chief science officer at Unistellar. So he's got two pretty cool gigs, if I do say so myself. We love talking about science. We really love talking about science in the context of The Expanse, which is an awesome show on Amazon Prime. If you aren't all caught up, particularly through season 4, episode 3, hit pause, go get caught up, and come back because we are going to talk a bunch of spoilers. Lots of science, lots of spoilers. So thanks for tuning in, and we will get started. Franck, before I dive into the details of the episode, how are you feeling about season 4 so far?
Well, I like watching it again because I watched it a long time ago, and watching it second time is even better because I see more details about the science, but also about the story itself, like enjoying more the characters. And Planet Ilus is an amazing world to visit. So, unfortunately, we have not yet been able to go to an exoplanet and visit it. As you know, that was kind of my dream. So, seeing it on TV in a science fiction show, that's not bad.
Yes, I have to say that I love this season because of Ilus. I think it's really cool. The world of the Expanse is very cool, this interplay between Mars, the Belters, and Earth, but I also would love to set foot on an exoplanet myself, so I get to do it vicariously through the characters on this show. So, we'll get to talk about Ilus. I think we're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about Ilus, but before we go there, I'm just going to do a quick overview of some of the other plot lines. We don't get any Belter action in the Earth solar system. So we don't see Kamina or anybody in that world. We know that Marco is lingering out there, but we don't get any of that this episode. Most of the non-Ilus plotline revolves around Mars because Bobby Draper, another one of my favorite characters, is getting all mixed up in some Martian criminals. The leader of the group, who is she finds out he is a corrupt detective, which was a very good twist. I love that twist in the episode. And I think this plot line is interesting, and it ties to Ilus because it's demonstrating how a bunch of Martians are leaving Mars to go to the other worlds through the Rain Gate. So there are a lot of people turning to crime, and the economic outlook of Mars right now is not great. We also have another really interesting plot line in our solar system on Earth because Avasarala, who runs the UN, is up for re-election or is facing an opponent for the first time in her career, Nancy Gao, who reported to her is running against her, and Avasarala thinks that she's dug up some dirt on Nancy and she's going to take her down. And Avasarala is extremely worried about what's going on in Ilus, or as the Earthlings call it, New Terra. So let's get into why she's nervous, because there's lots of stuff going on Ilus. Where do you want to start from?
Well, we stopped the previous episode when they just activated this weird structure, one of them. So what happened after activating it? We have a series of lightning going from those pyramidal shape structures, which are enormous. I estimate there should be something like 200 or 300 meter high, and they're much deeper as well. They mentioned that in the show. And this lightning seems to be striking on those structures at very exact frequency. I think it's 3.71 seconds. And
That's what I wrote down too.
yeah, and then after this, shall we go by come down, and then we have seismic activity.
Also known as an earthquake or a quake.
Ilus quake in this
case. An Ilus quake, yeah. So the characters feel the ground moving, yes, or they feel a rumble, right? They know that there's some sort of tectonic activity happening, right?
So that's what the scientist, I forgot his specialty, the guy who's basically mentioned that, and I would like to correct him again. He said, this is impossible. We can have an earthquake on Ilus because Ilus doesn't have any tectonic activity. That's not correct, because you can have earthquake on planet without tectonic activity.
So I was wrong too. So explain how you can have it, because the way that I understand earthquakes, and I am not a geologist, is that the plates shift.
Yeah,
is that not the only way you can have a quake?
No, that's not the only way. So the plate shift, and this is what happened in California, in the Andes, a lot of different places in the world.
Okay.
And because the shift or the subduction is not perfect, the plates are not perfectly elastic, there is some friction, and an earthquake, it's basically the shaking of the ground after a break of during this translation movement, subduction movement. Okay. But you can have earthquake due to other reasons. The most famous one that came in my mind when I was listening to watching the show was the earthquake we had. I think it was 7 years ago at Big Island. That's the Mauna Kea, right? Or the Mauna Loa. I forgot which the reason, basically, which is a volcano which is growing, the Mauna Loa, then kind of collapse. And this produced an entire earthquake on the Big Island, a very strong one, I think, magnitude 5 or 6 or something like that. So people felt it. And this isn't an earthquake due to a subduction. This is an earthquake due to the fact that a mountain basically collapsed. And you can have earthquake or tremor for other reasons. For instance, a nuclear explosion could be non-natural earthquake. If you're close to a nuclear test site, you will feel it as an earthquake. Mine blast. Or you can have an earthquake also if you have gigantic landslides. For instance, an entire part of a mountain collapsing. If you're not too far away, you will feel the earthquake. So this quick conclusion saying it's not possible you have an earthquake because there is no plate tectonic, it's wrong. And in fact, the show that, yeah, you can have an earthquake without having a plate tectonic. You can have an earthquake if you have a gigantic structure trying to coming out of the ground and spinning on itself. You found a name for that. What was the name you found for this?
I was calling it a mine. What? That's my clinical my diagnosis of this spinning structure. It looks like it's mining something. Yeah.
So it seems that this structure is absorbing the material or whatever it's doing, or maybe trying to get out. We don't know yet. And that's produced a gigantic earthquake because it's the same. It's a lot of energy release or into the crust, okay, in the crust of Ilus. So from human being like us, we will feel simply an earthquake.
So I know we've seen earthquakes on Earth, and we've seen them fictionally on Ilus. Have we seen them other places in our solar system?
Yeah, we sent recently a mission called InSight. I think it's been on Mars for 2 years now. It's a NASA mission, which is equipped with a seismometer. So those are the kind of instruments that we use to listen to vibration. You have seen that if you go to observatories around the world, you see them. And they are, and the one on Mars is very. It was built by the L'Institut Physique du Globe of Paris, and it's basically isolated from the wind if you see the structure because of this dome. So when the lander arrived, he had a platform with some arms, and he basically took the seismometer, put it on the ground. And then he took this kind of cloche bell side object and put it on the top to protect it from the wind and to isolate it from the wind. And then
so it can feel the ground and the right?
So it just feel the ground and not the wind. Doesn't work as well. They still have issue with the wind. They mentioned that in their papers. They published 5 papers in Nature last year where they described their first results. 2 years ago, sorry, I forgot. No, 1 year ago, sorry, it was last year. Yeah. So, and they described that they measure some earthquake, a lot of them, in fact, 450 seismic signals has been recorded by this instrument. They're very small, and there is like 2 of them which are significant, magnitude 4, to give you a comparison. And in April 1st of this year, they announced again the discovery of the recording of 2 new very strong earthquakes, also magnitude 3-4. What is interesting is that from the earthquake structure, they seem and the intensity, they think they are coming from the same area of Mars, an area called Cerberus Fossae. You can look on the map where is Cerberus Fossae, and that seems to be the center of the seismic activity of Mars. So,
and we don't know why there's activity.
Not yet.
If it's now this is going to show my lack of knowledge, but we think that the core of Mars is pretty inactive, right?
That's correct.
So would that mean that that the planet's tectonic plates aren't moving around very much?
That's correct.
Right. So it might be something else.
Yeah. So one of possibility could be, and again, it's not really my field, so I'm just telling you what I read around. It's a contraction of the planet due to the shrinking of the nucleus. And for some reason, this Cerberus Fossae is a place where there is a lot of contraction and a lot of breaking. So we see this, we can hear those earthquakes. It's not a pyramidal shaped body spinning on itself. On Mars, we have not seen that. So don't worry, we have not seen aliens.
There are no mines or whatever this object is on Mars to date.
No, we have not seen that. And we observe Mars continuously from above. So
we would see if there was alien technology on Mars.
But that's interesting that we can start now listening to seismic activity on planets like Mars. And I think there will be more of them in the future. There is one thing I want to mention. In the show, they also have a seismometer. 3 seismometer, and they separate them by at least 50 kilometers. That's the requirement he has, because they want to be able to know the localization, the source of this earthquake. And so what they do in this case, they simply do what we call triangulation. So they receive a signal. So you can imagine, I will put a figure, I'll show a figure online, which is very interesting. So you have 3 sources, okay? And each of them will hear basically a signal. So you can draw a circle around them that will tell you where the signal is coming from. At the intersection of these three circles is basically the real position of the source. And that's the way they find minor or whatever.
Minor, right. And triangulation is something that you do a lot of if you're trying to figure out an object's position, right? I know that CAMS, which is a SETI project to track meteor showers, transient meteor showers, each what we call observatory or location consists actually of 3 sets of cameras in that same lake. So we have one in at Lick Observatory, I believe. And so they're actually 3 locations of cameras so that you can triangulate exactly where the meteor showers are interacting with Earth's atmosphere, right?
That's correct. In this case, you because you look at different angle, you see the meteor coming from slightly different location compared to the background stars, and by triangulation, you can basically derive exactly the position and where
it is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And by doing that, you can figure out what the parent object is, which I think is very cool. If it's an asteroid or comet or whatever, and it's debris. So meteor showers are very cool. So I think that this object on Ilus is a mining mechanism. What do you think it is? Will you hazard a guess with me and be really wrong with me?
What is this object? I think it's some kind of receptor or emitters of information. And the reason we see it is because it's coming out of is being designed and is underneath and it's coming up because he wants to be able to communicate with the moons or something else. And that's the reason. We will see. Frankly, I don't remember what is it exactly. So I've seen the show a long time ago, but I don't remember.
I don't remember it either. There are definitely parts of this season that I think we're going to get into in the next couple episodes that are a little bit more, no spoilers, but they're related to the structures in a tangential way. But I think I don't quite remember the conclusions they came to about this technology. So it's very exciting to see what happens. Anything else on Ilus? I don't think that they obviously the characters haven't figured out exactly what's going on with this technology.
So yeah, the last scene is it's basically Holden decided to launch kind of a torpedo on the top of the structure that blew up, and the structure is still intact but stopped spinning. So I don't know for how long, maybe for just a few minutes. We don't know because the show ended there.
It was a very bold move.
Yeah.
And yes, it was a very bold move for Holden to blow it up.
Especially without having any idea of what will be the reaction of this object, which is extraterrestrial, could have, and obviously more advanced than what we have or what they have also even in the future, because it's a structure which is underneath the ground and coming out. And they mentioned multiple times that the interior of Ilus seems to be more complex. There is some kind of structure inside. So it seems that the planet has been already not terraform, but intraform. I don't know if that's a word. So inside the cave, there is some kind of structure inside the planet.
It reminds me a little bit of, I'm blanking on the exact name, but isn't there some sort of tier of civilizations and how complex? I'll put it in the comments.
1, 2, and 3 civilization.
Yes. And it reminds me a little bit about the idea of building megastructures around stars in order to harness the energy of the star. I'm not overly familiar with that, with the different...
So the classification is called the Kardashev scale.
Okay.
And that's a level of technological advancement of a civilization. And the way you basically imagine this is that the amount of energy which is being collected by this civilization. So the Kardashev 1 is a civilization that can harvest the energy of its planet itself. So it could be by having the planet covered completely with solar panels, plus having taking the energy coming from the wind, or taking the energy, the geothermic energy coming from the interior. Mm-hmm. And then Kardashev 2 is the same, but for the entire sun, the star of the solar system. And finally, Kardashev 3 is when you take the energy of your galaxy itself, which is like extremely advanced. Okay.
Yeah, it seems like there should be a step in between there. Like if you're able to take the energy from your solar system or something, which I don't know. It's hard to say whether the proto-molecule civilization conquered like a galaxy or harvested a galaxy, or if they were on their way. But my take on this is that they were clearly on Ilus, New Terra, to harvest some sort of material that they needed.
So based on what we know our civilization, to go back to that, we have type 0. So we harvest 0.73 of the energy that we could collect if we were collecting the entire energy of our planet. So
what do you think? Is humanity still at a 0 in the world of the Expanse? Probably, because we haven't in the Expanse. Earthlings haven't been able to use the entire energy of their planet, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So what the human did, instead of focusing on one planet and getting the energy on one planet, is to spread in the entire solar system and get energy from different sources to have habitats, which are not perfect, but it's an easier solution if you can travel, of course. But if you have a civilization that cannot travel for some reason, doesn't have the desire of traveling, then this civilization will have to learn how to harvest the energy of its planet completely, and then maybe one day get the energy of its sun, etc.
Yeah. Hi, and welcome back. There was a power outage. We won't tell you whose power was out, but somebody on this call's power was out. So there's going to be a little blip. But we are talking about Ilus. I think we've wrapped up on all the Ilus items for this episode, but our friend Naomi is not feeling great. What's going on with her, Franck?
Well, Naomi is suffering from the gravity of Ilus planet. Remember, Ilus is roughly the same size than Earth.
So so the gravity and the pressure would be the same.
Yeah. So the gravity is the same. And Naomi grew up as a belter. So the gravity on Earth is a typical 9.8 value that you use. The gravity on Mars is a third of that. The gravity on the moon is a fifth. And the gravity on asteroids, which are significantly smaller, right? We're talking about Ceres, for instance, which is 1,000 kilometers. It's 1/40th. And the gravity on Pallas is even less, 1/50th. So that means that those belters, they grew up in an environment which has almost no gravity, microgravity, we can say. Plus, they travel a lot in their spacecraft, as you remember, walking with their magnetic boots, but they still don't have a gravity most of the time.
Right.
So their body adapted to the lack of gravity. Their body changed. In fact, someone told me that in the book, they describe the belter as very tall people, very thin and tall.
That's something, that they talk about a lot in the first season. About, there's some names for them because they have longer bones. Skinnies. Right. That's the slur for them because of both the lack of gravity and I think the lack of oxygen and lots of other nutrients. But they've kind of dropped that in the show. But right now we're seeing the effects of that on Naomi, right?
Yeah, so Naomi, before going to Ilus, decided that she wanted to go on the planet. And we see a first step in the first episode of this season, which is absolutely beautiful. But something we didn't mention much, is that before going on the planet, she had to go through a very painful treatment. The treatment corresponds to injections of medication that we don't really have at the moment to readapt her body to the gravity. And what they're afraid of is the fact that she probably has what we see with astronauts who have been staying for a long period of time in orbit around Earth. They have a muscle atrophy, so they're losing their muscles because we don't need that much muscle when you don't have gravity. You don't have to stay straight, for instance. They have what we call osteoporosis, which is the
your bone density lessens.
Exactly, due to the fact that we don't need that strong bones, and so they basically the calcium is being evacuated slowly. And we also have an issue with the distribution of liquid in the body. I'm not a biologist, but I do know that we're made of a large part of liquid, 60% of our body at least. And when you have gravity, the distribution of this liquid is kind of stabilized with different systems, the hydraulic system of our body, basically. It's kind of interesting. The blood flow is regulated with the heart and the brain and so on. So there is all this complex mechanism. And in this case, she basically don't have to do that. She never had to do this. So a heart, we can just imagine that simply the heart is much weaker. That's someone who has grown up on the planet. So they mentioned that they do this treatment for the bone. We see that at the beginning of the show, and they mentioned as well her heart not being fully adapted. And then let's go back to this episode. What happened?
She collapses.
Yes,
she collapses, and I meant to go back and rewatch this scene, but I do know when I believe she's in the Rossi and she's like having trouble breathing, and she plugs herself in or takes some measurement of her bodily signals, and her heart rate is like 140 beats per minute. I saw, which is extremely high, especially if you're just walking around. And then she's on Ilus, and she walks into Lucia's med bay essentially and collapses. And Lucia,
after screaming at Mercury.
Yes, so she was agitated, right? With Mercury also should have been screamed at, but yes, that should not instigate like a collapsing fit. And Lucia said that she saw the same thing happen with some of her fellow belters who came to Ilus originally, where the gravity medication did not work, and they died. So it's not looking good for Naomi.
Yeah, and this is gonna be a problem for us, human being, if you go to space. I mean, if we decide to live in space, to settle in space, we will have this problem. It's not science fiction, it's fact. We see with astronauts, as I mentioned. So you can imagine that generation of human beings living in space or in small gravity around asteroids will basically be different and will not be able to adapt and go back to Earth.
Yeah.
So there was this idea of having an F, they call that, would be kind of a gigantic spaceship with animals in it and humans travel to Alpha Centauri for 100 years, 400 years, if we find one day a propulsion system fast enough for that. Well, every time we talk about this in previous science fiction book, they say, yeah, they're in the spaceship, they're in the spaceship, they arrive on the planet and they land and it's fine. But no, it's not going to be that easy. After 400 years in space, the fourth generation at least will be very transformed. Probably.
Unless we can figure out how to create gravity in a spaceship, but that's also a huge issue.
Yeah. Well, we can rotate the ship. There may be some area where we have gravity. There was those science fiction books where you can see there is part of the spaceship, and then there is some kind of small kind of elevators orbiting around like that. And that will be a place with gravity where we put, for instance, a area like infirmaries or beds for hospital, because you need to have gravity to do some very basic surgery, but also for those humans who maybe need to readapt. Another solution will be to completely accept the fact that we will live in no gravity, so kind of transform human being genetically to adapt human being to the lack of gravity. And we don't know how to do that. Yeah.
No, well, because we evolved to live on this planet, right? We evolved to live at this pressure and with this amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. And we evolved to fit the ecosystem. So if we go into a different ecosystem, it's not going to be good. It is a big hand-wavy thing in a lot of science fiction of just, oh yes, faster than light travel. Oh yes, gravity and spaceships. Oh yes, this planet's atmosphere is exactly the same as Earth. So it's one of the great things about The Expanse is that it's not super hand-wavy in that respect. So it's very interesting. And I love Naomi, so I hope she ends up being okay. She figures it out. Anything else from you, Franck, on this episode?
No, that's all. We can wrap up. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Grudge Report. I'm Margaret. That's Franck. We both work at the SETI Institute, and the Grudge Report is a product of the SETI Institute. And the Institute is a nonprofit research organization that is concerned with understanding the nature and origin of life in the universe. So if you think all the stuff in The Expanse is cool, you should check out our website, poke around our YouTube channel, because there are tons of really cool videos on all sorts of things related to planetary science in the field of SETI. And if you are so inclined, please donate. I believe all the links are in the little box below. So click to your heart's content, and we will see you next time.
Bye.